What's up, world? It's Mio Jackson Reaction, back with another video. Do me the biggest favor and click that subscribe button. I'm trying to make my channel grow, and I can't do it without your help. In this video, we're going to be reacting to a few videos about China and Africa's relationship and the loans that Africa is accepting from China to build out their infrastructure. Are they predatory and over time will allow China to take over Africa? Or are they good for Africa? Let's form our own opinion and dig into this video. Check it out.
In the past 2 decades, China has built large infrastructure projects in almost every country in Africa. And this has made Western critics uncomfortable.
China and Africa can forge an even stronger, comprehensive strategic and cooperative partnership.
A common portrayal of China's lending practices is known as debt trap diplomacy, a phrase made popular after being used in government documents during the Trump administration. The so-called debt trap is created when a country lends to poorer countries, intentionally overwhelming them with unsustainable debt, forcing them to surrender strategic assets or concede increased political leverage. But so far, there's no evidence that such a debt trap has been sprung in Africa.
So they're saying, so far, there's been no predatory loans or debt trap loans made in Africa. But my only pushback to that is, have we seen the documents? Or is this just a opinion? Or is this just a Chinese documentary that's swaying toward China? Because, I mean, if only thing you can use for collateral is land when you don't have the money. So if you renege on those debts, if you don't pay those debts off, you lose the land. I mean, and that's part of what the leaders are signing off on when they're getting these debts from China. So somebody has got to pay, and you have to have some type of collateral.
Now, there's always a certain grain of truth, like with every stereotype to it, but it breaks down very, very quickly upon any type of serious examination.
The focus on debt trap diplomacy is part of wider Western anxieties towards China in Africa.
We've already seen that Chinese investments in Chinese infrastructure projects have been linked to increasing Chinese influence within the host country ruling elite. That may end up becoming somewhat of a leverage point for China to push some of these countries or ruling elites to side with China on critical issues that are important to the U.S. or to its allies.
And see, that's very important because not only is it about land, it's about political power. So, you know, a lot of times we think it's just all about money and land and things like that. But if you take over the leaders, if, you know, take out the head and the body will follow.
But while the US has focused its Africa strategy on aid and social services, China has been building.
African governments themselves said, we are tired of aid and charity. We want to do trade. We want to be treated like partners. The Chinese came along and said, great, we don't do aid and charity. We want to do business with you.
Global Gateway will mobilize 300 billion euros till 2027.
Let's not let that slide because the speaker just said that China doesn't do aid. They just do business. So when they asked for aid, the answer was no. And a lot of times we hear a lot of pushback about America. And yes, America does offer aid. Some may say that the aid is entangled with other type of shiesty deals and sinister deals, but they do offer aid. And China said, no, we don't offer aid. We're going to offer you some business.
Now the US and Europe are answering back with their own infrastructure initiatives to counter China, but African experts are skeptical.
At the end of the day, China has been that guy around the corner with, you know, a bouquet of flowers to Africa, the US, you know, Europe and the UK have time and time again said, be careful of the flowers you see out of the window. They have thorns on them.
Yeah, it's a saying that says the devil is not going to appear with a pitchfork and horns on their head. The devil was a beautiful angel, the most beautiful angel. So you got to be careful and always read the fine print after.
In Ghana, the handover of power from the British government went off smoothly and with dignity.
From the 1950s into the 1970s, countries on the African continent gained independence from their European colonizers. US and European-led organizations like the IMF and the World Bank funded much-needed infrastructure across the continent. But that slowly stopped.
The United States and Europe kind of backed away from infrastructure in the 60s and 70s. It's something that we did very, very well for a long time in the post-war era. We built vast amounts of infrastructure throughout the world. And one of the things you see in Africa is that so much of the railways and the highways and the infrastructure was built during the colonial period. And back then it was quite solid, but it's been decrepit because the former colonial governments are not plowing in lots of money.
Enter China.
Now, that's a great opportunity for China. You know, when the other countries abandoned Africa, I mean, you can't fault Africa. At some point, where are you going to turn to? Because infrastructure is needed, you know.
As early as the 1970s, Beijing began building the Tazara Railway, a link between the Zambian town of Kapiriamposhi and Dar es Salaam port in Tanzania. At the time, it was the longest railway in sub-Saharan Africa, allowing Zambia to ship copper, bypassing white rule Rhodesia and South Africa.
And see, and that's all Africa needs is help with infrastructure, because they've got all the resources. They've got a lot of resources that is used around the globe. And they just need ways to get it to ports and get it onto planes. And then I believe with an uncorrupt government in each country, you know, they can be self-sustaining.
It also gave China much-needed political allies.
Beijing said, we have problems, you have problems, we will help you out. And they embarked on this. And this is really some of the early seeds that China sowed in Africa that later, you know, came to clearly define the divide between the West and the East as far as China's involvement in Africa is concerned.
In the early 2000s, as China looked to expand markets and political influence abroad, its investment in Africa ramped up.
The Chinese said, well, guess what? We are the best in the world now at producing large-scale infrastructure fast and cheap. And we have a surplus of capital. So we'll loan you the money. We have our great contracting companies. We have all of this skill and all this ability to deliver fast and cheap. And in that sense, it was really an ideal match. They recognized what Africa's development stage was, and they said, you know what? 30 years ago, that was us. We recognize a lot of what's going on here. You don't have enough infrastructure. You have a large population that's growing quickly. Also, let's not underestimate there is a shared history here of anti-colonial struggle. So you tick all of those different boxes, and Africa made a lot of sense for the Chinese to come in.
China is currently involved in an estimated 35 African countries and has made significant contributions to their infrastructure, including ports, railways, and power plants.
Ports, railways, and power plants. So that's just telling you what Africa really needs. 35 different countries, that's a lot of power. That's a lot of political power. I don't care how you slice it. You know, you default on those loans. Even making those loans to you makes you indebted to me in more ways than just money. 35 countries.
It's estimated that China has invested more than $340 billion in Africa. So compared to how much China is investing across the world, this may not be as much, but for Africa, it's a lot of money because of the huge infrastructure gap that Africa faces.
But there are noticeable differences between Chinese financing and how the West lends, historically with low interest rates and flexible terms.
There must be over millions of different types of loans out there. But if you were to take an eagle's eye view of the different kinds of loans involving Chinese lenders, then you can broadly categorize them into three different types.
The loans fall into three categories: zero-interest loans offered as aid, concessional loans which have a lower interest rate often intended for large infrastructure projects, and the most common, commercial loans with higher interest rates in line with what you would get from a typical private bank.
Okay, so all of those loans, even if you got a low interest rate or a high interest rate or zero interest rate, if you can't pay it back, you lose, game over. That's the important thing to understand because, like, let's just say, for instance, in buying houses in America, you can use what's called a hard money lender. And a hard money lender will usually loan you money at a high interest rate, but as long as you pay it back fast, you don't suffer those consequences. But even if you got a zero interest rate to do what you need to do and you default on the loans, it's still no good. So that's the most important thing, is to be able to pay the loans back. And sometimes being predatory or being a predator is, I'll loan it to you for your collateral, which is usually going to be greater than what I'm loaning you the money for. And then I know you can't pay it back. That's the slick part about it.
One of the very interesting trends that we see when researchers discuss Chinese loans is that there is a tendency to bunch all three together. Well, the very first question you should ask yourself whenever you see something like that is, well, are they comparing apples to oranges?
Now, he said one of their main things that they do when they make those type of loans is to bunch them all together. So they give you a zero interest loan with a low interest loan and a high interest loan and bunch them all together. Which, if you really think about it, you just end up with a high interest loan, a mid to high interest loan at the end of the day. You take a zero interest loan, a low interest loan, and a high interest loan and bunch them all together. That sounds fishy to me. Because if you really wanted to help and you really wanted to be in business, it would 9 times out of 10, to be fair, it would always be a low interest loan.
Because if you're comparing commercial loans to something available from the World Bank or one of its different agencies, then you're not really comparing like for like. And the fact of the matter is this, and I hope the borrowers out there are listening, 95%, if not 99%, of the loan agreement are there in favor of the lenders, no matter who you deal with.
See that? They said 99% of loans out there in the world are in favor of the lenders, no matter who you deal with. No matter who you deal with, the loan is going to be in favor of the lenders. So I don't understand what's so great about it, except the need for it now and to start building now.
This is because by the time you sign that loan agreement and you get the money, you'll have the money in your hands, and the only thing the bank will have is a piece of paper. That is why the loan agreements are in their favor.
Nah, you'll have more than a piece of paper when you're dealing with a powerful nation and country, because they have military to support them and to enforce their loans and to take that collateral. So just saying you'll have a piece of paper, nah, it's much bigger than that. So don't let the play on words, family, take you out of your brain. Don't let it move you. You know, just listen and pay attention.
In one report which analyzed 100 Chinese contracts, it revealed that the loans are structured to give an advantage over other creditors and allows action to be taken if the borrower acts contrary to the interests of a People's Republic of China entity.
Now, what does that mean? The loans or the contract can be null and void if you act adverse to the interests of a People of Republic of China entity. I don't know. That's kind of a gray area, and that can be anything. It can be any little small thing. They say, "Oh, well, you acted adverse to the interest. Give me that loan. You acted adverse. Nope. Blah blah blah. We calling our loans." That's dangerous. Always read the fine print. That's why they say it. That's why it's a saying. Always read.
There are
the
also
fine
unusual clauses that shroud agreements in secrecy.
When you look at multilateral lenders like the World Bank and the different agencies, their shareholders are countries, and they're required to publish their lending and activities just to be transparent. They don't have any choice. On the other hand, when you come to commercial banks, then you'll see a very different case. And that is, banks often are under a duty of confidentiality to their clients. I think the Chinese banks are no different.
But the rush to give out loans by the Chinese has meant some of their early investments weren't as profitable as projected.
So when China stepped into the field, it was much welcomed by the developing world that there would be increased financing for infrastructure. However, with the rush to get projects off the ground, to put them into action and to begin construction, critical due diligence was often left by the wayside.
See, in a rush to get to building up the infrastructure, they didn't do their due diligence on the contracts like they should have, because it was just, give me the money, we're ready to get started. But as we see, that can be dangerous. Only fools rush in. Only fools
Financial
rush in.
sustainability, social and environmental sustainability assessments kind of never were done, or were done haphazardly, or were simply not transparent or available to the populations. What this has ended up causing is states to take on projects that they initially thought were affordable, but unfortunately, they've been now saddled by debt.
China is coming for its pound of flesh in Uganda.
In 2021, the Entebbe International Airport in Uganda came under fire after local media reported that the airport would be taken over by China.
We call this a debt trap.
After closer examination of the contract, it was found there was no debt trap, and both sides have denied that the airport is in danger of a takeover.
I think there is an assumption that certain governments are not able to look after themselves, or they're either not sophisticated enough, or just simply too corrupt to look after its own interests. I think in my personal view and experience, that just simply hasn't been true.
Now, what he's trying to say is, hey, listen, Africa's a grown man. Africa's a grown woman. They can look out for themselves. They signed these things. They're even saying that the governments aren't corrupt like you say they are. I don't know. It just smells like a little bit of double talk. Sounds like a little bit of double talk to me. I don't know, but I understand Africa. I understand we got to build, and we got to do it now.
Experts say more should be done by borrowing countries to make sure loans are more favorable to their interests. But the Chinese argue that the risk level is higher in African countries, and greater repayment assurances are needed for loans that might not otherwise be available.
So now they want greater assurances. You have to give us more stuff for these loans. You have to give us more collateral to make sure that, just to make it fair to us, because we're going to give you this money. So, matter of fact, we only want an X amount of land. Now you got to give us triple that now just to get these loans, since you're in such a big rush.
Certainly in my 20 years of experience, I've never seen a case where the Chinese bank would just say, look, don't read this, just sign on the dotted line. In fact, they will spend days and days, and they're sitting with us, going through every line of the document and making sure the other side understands, because they know in 10 years' time, if they don't explain this clearly, this is going to come back and haunt them.
Certainly, there are issues with how China finances projects. There are issues around transparency, but I don't think this is some sort of grand master plan from Beijing in order to ensnare developing countries into debt and become further beholden to Beijing?
I don't think it is either. I don't think that they're coming in with some big grand plan scheme. But when you really think about it, debtors and people who loan to you, they don't come in with a big grand plan. They let you fall right into the trap yourself. You know, all you have to do is put the cheese on the mouse trap, and the mouse is going to come and get it itself because they're hungry. So, no, I don't think that they're just being a predator to Africa. But when you really are thirsty, you're going to drink. You're going to drink, no matter
In
what.
Kenya and Nigeria, debts to Beijing are growing. These include Kenya's $3.6 billion railway from Mombasa to Nairobi, which reportedly lost $200 million in 3 years of operation. And
See, the train is already losing money. It just started operating and it's losing money. See? So, see, it's very dangerous what you build, when you build, and how you rush. But I'm not upset with Africa because they're trying and they need it. And I'm hoping the best for them because you can do it. You can make it happen. But we're going to need jobs that's paying above average, you know, and they're going to have to export at top dollar. They're just going to have to, because you have to keep a circulating economy to bring things like this railway out of the negative. That's the only way things like that, if your society isn't making money and circulating money and creating an economy, you're going to just keep going down,
a
down,
$1.3 billion loan from the China Exim Bank to fund Nigeria's largest infrastructure project, a 157-kilometer segment of the Lagos-Kano Railway.
The government itself can't afford to finance these things. The private sector isn't really stepping up. The West has not got an alternative program, so therefore China is the only game in town, and the terms of the loans are reasonable. At the same time, you have members of the National Assembly, particularly from the main opposition party, vocally criticizing the government for what they perceive to be a lack of transparency around the management of the loans from China. They often articulate this worry that you hear in other parts of Africa that China will try and seize Nigerian assets in the event of a default by the Nigerian government.
See, now that's deep. The African people have a concern that it's not so much that it's the loans, but it's the management of the loans. Wow, that's deep. Thanks for watching Mill Jackson Reaction. Just know I will react. If you want to check out this full video, go to the Bloomberg channel. It's called The Myth of the Chinese Debt Trap in Africa. It's a very good documentary. Check it out, family. Thanks for hanging out. I'll see you next time. Stay blessed.